1930, there were 6 million farms in America. Today, that number has plummeted to 1.8 million. And now 85% of the beef in America is controlled by just 4 companies. That means fewer farmers have to produce more food, thus incentivizing them to produce a high quantity of food instead of high quality food. Plus, if something goes wrong, the 98% of us that don't grow food are at risk of starving. Yikes, that's dark. Let's go darker. A few very wealthy companies have control over all the food. And if North Korea has taught us anything, a centralized food supply can accidentally or intentionally kill a lot of people. The bottom line is this: you can't wait until hits the fan to figure out what your family's going to eat, but all hope is not lost. Here's the plan. It's called From the Farm, an industry-disrupting platform that directly connects customers and local farmers with a website that's as easy to use as Airbnb. From the Farm gives you fresher, higher quality foods, strengthens communities, and helps small farmers not only survive, but thrive. We can't do this alone. We need the strength of the American people behind us. Help us build a new food system that combines the wisdom of the past with the technology of the future. Investing in From the Farm isn't just a financial decision. It's an investment into our future, our small family farms, and our food sovereignty. Invest today.
All right, welcome back to the most inconsistent podcast on the internet, From the Farm. I get these in where I can and as often as I can, but man, when I get a good guest that's ready to go, we make it happen. So today joining me, as you guys can see, is Jack Payne. Jack Payne is the owner of the Nevada Livestock Market. He's a Western cattle rancher out of Nevada. His ranch covers quite a bit of ground. Jack and I met by actually connection through my cousin, Ramsey Hughes. Ramsey's where I first got going in the ag space when I started selling beef for his ranch, Anchor Brand Ranch. If you guys like awesome ranch content, check out his YouTube channel, Anchor Brand Ranch. It's him and his wife and 9 kids running a ranch down there in Tikaboo Valley, Nevada, pretty close to the black mailbox where the aliens show up and drop their mail off, according to the conspiracy theorists online. But anyway, the way we got connected is, we've as you saw in the video, From the Farm is a business I co-founded with my business partner, Brooke Entz, and our vision is to create a parallel food economy where consumers can go right to the farmers and ranchers and shake the hand that feeds them and make sure their producer gets the retail value of that meat. Which we're going to talk a lot about today with Jack. So anyway, in pursuit of building this platform and really starting to understand the policies and the things that were kind of in the way of our producers being successful and really a big part of why we're losing so many of them, policy became something that I started looking at way more than I ever thought I would. But what became clear to me is if we have federal regulations in the way of you, the consumer, shaking Jack's hand and others, then what's the point of building a platform? And so I've been drinking from a fire hose ever since. I do not claim to be the expert. My job, because we work with ranchers and farmers and dairymen and, all across the board, that's who's on our platform. It's impossible to be an expert. And anybody that claims they are, I'll call their bluff and certainly call my own. I guess what I've always said is my job is to get you over the bullseye, and then guys like Jack are going to help you hit the bullseye in particular areas. So anyway, I reached out to my cousin. We got an invitation by the Secretary of Agriculture, Brooke Rollins, to bring Western cattle ranchers to DC to meet with her and kind of help her understand what producers have been dealing with for many decades in the West and why we've lost so much ground and our herd numbers have declined. And there's a lot to that. But so I reached out to my cousin. He said, call Jack. Jack's somebody I listened to. We've sold cattle at his auction. And I trust my cousin. That's, I was looking for people that I was in alignment with from what I was seeing. And I am not a rancher. I've never claimed to be. Sometimes people introduce me as such, and I try to make that correction because I am not. Wish I was, but I always say if my mom was my dad, I would be. But that's just how it went. And now, really God's design for me in my life, it was actually a good thing that I didn't grow up in it. Didn't like that when I was younger, but I see the value of that now. So anyway, because I came from the outside and started asking questions, and I was open to anything. I was open to different organizations that claimed to be supporting the cattle rancher. So I went to the different meetings and listened to what I had to say. And I ultimately hung my hat where the things I heard at those meetings actually made sense for what would, first help the producer, and then by relation or by consequence would serve the consumer. Because right now in America, we have a national security issue with how our food is produced, where it's coming from, and really being aware of that. And my job is to try to help out as much as I can. I've also said I'm not trying to be right. I'm trying to get it right. So if I get new information that shows me some things a different way, I'm not stuck in my ways, and I'm willing to evolve. And that's how I've got to where I am today. So with that, Jack, welcome. Thanks for being here. I'm glad to have met you and make a couple of trips out to Washington with you and see how peek behind the curtain, so to say, and see how things go. So welcome. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, AJ, appreciate you having me on, and thanks for everything that you're doing on the political side and just the educational side for the consumers and the producers.
Yeah, thank you. So I gave a little bit of an intro, but why don't you tell us your background? How, where you come from? How long have you guys been involved in ranching, and how'd you get in the livestock market business? All those things.
Yeah, I'll try to give you the short version. Homeschooled up in Jordan Valley, Oregon. I grew up on the Idaho side in Owyhee County. They call it Owyhee County because it's spelled Owyhee because that's how they thought you spelled Hawaii. I guess some settlers from Hawaii had got lost out there and never were found. And so grew up in Owyhee County, Idaho. Closest town was Jordan Valley, Oregon. Then I married my wife. She was from down here. Her family ranchers in Nevada. And we started running cattle down here just because the winters up there are pretty severe, and I'm not a very good farmer, and I hate putting up hay. And so I fell in love with Nevada because cattle are out year round, and it's just more of a cowboy type atmosphere, and that fit me well. So then we went to market our calves the first year down here, and there was only 2 livestock auctions in the whole state, and there still is. And one of them shut down, and I just felt that the other one wasn't really treating people fairly. I've seen a lot of cattle leaving the state, and I'm like, man, there's an opportunity here. So we dove into that, and that was in 2006. And I can't believe it's already been 19 years, but yeah, here we are. I've learned a lot about the cattle business and the marketing side, and but just grew up simple. We just were a cow calf deal. We ran all of our calves over to yearlings. Sold them as 7-8 weights in the fall, and that was just that money went back into the ranch. And very, very simple lifestyle. We didn't have much going on. My parents weren't at all involved in the cattle politics. Really, there was no social media or anything then. So all that my family had to go off of was Drover's Magazine, Farm Journal, beef. That was the gospel. We just believed them,
Yeah.
I always would see those beef checkoff ads in there and ask, I wonder why they're advertising to the ranchers. Like, we're going to eat beef regardless, Anyway, I understand why now as I've learned more about this industry, but just imagine where we would be today in the cattle industry if we didn't have other sources of news to kind of see what's going on out there. And I think, I don't want to get off on that rabbit trail, but I think a lot of that is why so many of us are where we are today, and how we've lost so many producers is just nobody was really seeing what was going on. It was just too late time we woke up.
Yeah, that makes sense. I remember having a conversation with one of my uncles about the fact that we do have social media now, and that gives folks a voice and a reach that never had one before, because otherwise you had to take out an ad and pay for that. And that was expensive. And so the only way you could get a message out there is if you had some kind of funding to fund that message. And then it was going to be, 100% biased to whatever that agency wanted or who was paying. Even some of these magazines now, you'll know the message they're promoting based off the advertisers in there a lot of times, right? Because they're a business. And so if they piss off the people putting money in, then they'll lose that money. And so it kind of dictates how and what they talk about. So, but now with social media, and not to say that what we put out isn't biased in some sense of our own understanding, but at least it now has the opportunity for consumers and otherwise to kind of dive in and go listen to what this guy has to say, and then go listen to what this guy has to say, and kind of make their own informed choice. But that's certainly been a help. Do you ever think you'd be involved this much and talking this much about the industry and the politics behind it?
No, I don't. I never dreamt it would happen. I guess just by being pretty outspoken and pretty firm in my beliefs on this stuff has kind of opened some doors, I guess. I mean, I'm sure it's offended some people, but it's also brought us a ton of supporters. We're often accused of having an anti-establishment marketing plan, is what they call it. Like we're outspoken about the industry to get more business. I guess they never thought of somebody just having some principles and believing in something and speaking up about it, because it's pretty simple for me. I guess maybe it is selfish in a way. I own a livestock auction, and this business goes out of business if I don't have business. And my business is producers. And like last week's auction, we had just under 5,700 head of cattle, and 163 different customers sold cattle in that particular sale on that day. And that comes to an average of 34 head of cattle per customer. So, those little guys matter, and the big guys matter too. Everybody matters. But oftentimes we see some of these cattle organizations just leaning towards what's best for the big guys. And my feeling is, if you take care of the little guys, what's good for the little guy is also going to benefit the big guy. But if you strictly focus your attention on helping the big guys, that's just going to allow them to get bigger, which squeezes out the little guys. And so that's my view on it. I could be wrong, but that's how I look at it.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. Do you see in your auction, do you see more, I guess this is a general question to the industry as a whole, because I've heard the average herd size is less than 100 or 100 or less. Is that typically what you see today? And it's probably going to be different from, area to area, but out where you're at in Nevada, what's the kind of the herd size on average that you see out there?
That's a good question. I can just tell you what our customer base is, and the number of cattle they sell. Nevada is very unique because we've got ranches that run between 5,000 and 10,000 head of mama cows. And then we've got lots of people that have a job in town, and they farm on the side, and they have, construction companies and all that are running from 20 cows to 100 cows. So we've got a pretty wide, we got some huge ranches out here that run a lot of cattle, and we've got a lot of small producers. And at Nevada Livestock Marketing, we want to work for both of them. Yeah.
Have you seen that change over the years? And what kind of change have you seen, over the decades that you've been involved in this, in terms of like herd dispersals, like people getting out of it completely or having to shrink for different reasons? What have you observed in that area?
Yeah, definitely seen a lot go out of business. I mean, our customer base has increased just because we're drawing cattle from further away. We're starting to get a lot of cattle out of Idaho, Oregon, Utah, California. When I first come to Nevada, they said Nevada was an export-only state, that there would never be any cattle come to this state. And I just asked the question, like, why? That doesn't make sense, We're right next to California, and California has all this lush green grass in the wintertime. I don't know why people from Utah or Idaho wouldn't send their cattle here, because they're going to end up in California anyway. We're on the way, right? And so our numbers have increased, but looking around as you're watching your neighbors and friends and family, there's a lot of people have gone out of business. In Nevada, there's a lot of big mines, gold and silver, and they have came in and bought up a lot of these big ranches and kind of consolidated them, but they don't run them as a ranch. They just lease them out kind of to people that can help them on a political standpoint, is how I see it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
say more about that. What are you seeing with that? Because we got a lot of the listeners are on here are consumers, and for the first time in a long time, consumers are actually listening to and trying to understand what's happening in the politics around ultimately what ends up in their grocery store.
Yeah. Well, like on the mines, they want to mine, right? They
Mhm.
pay their bills selling gold. We pay our bills selling beef, but they use the cattle ranching side as a how do I use it as mitigation points. So we're going to rest up here in the South Point pasture this year, and then that's going to look good at the BLM, and we're going to get sage grouse credits because supposedly cattle grazing was bad for sage grouse. We now know that studies have been done through colleges and a big ranching company out of Idaho, Simplot, helped fund a lot of that. These studies have been done and proven that actually cattle grazing benefits sage grouse. But over this last 10 years, a lot of if we want to go over here and mine and move this mountain, that's viewed as not good for sage grouse. So we're going to go over here and rest this pasture to get mitigation points to offset moving this mountain. And my question is just now, like, okay, well, now that we've proven cattle grazing is good for the sage grouse, by resting those pastures and getting mitigation points, you were actually hurting the sage grouse.
Mm.
And can't get anybody to admit that, but the facts are out there, that grazing cattle is benefiting sage grouse. And the ranchers all know that, because everywhere we go, your sage grouse are going to be in them little meadows that have that little short green grass that's came back after the cattle have grazed it off. That's where you always see the sage grouse. You don't see sage grouse out in this tall, dead, rank yellow grass where the coyotes can sneak up on them.
Yeah.
They're not stupid,
Yeah.
So, yeah, just getting back to the mining side of it. That's why they've bought these ranches, and then they've leased them out to people, but they don't let you run the number of cattle that need to be grazed out there. So just that alone, just take that small isolated part of this industry that has shrunk the Nevada cattle numbers significantly by the mines buying those ranches.
Is
Another
it
reason bottom, AJ, is just for the water. A lot of that, the mines use a lot of water, and they have to clean up that water, so they're spraying it back out on pivots that came with the ranches. And I sure don't blame people for selling to the mines when the money's that good and you've been struggling for years, and somebody walks up and offers you 10 or 20 million for a ranch that you probably thought was worth $1 million. It'd be very tempting to take it. So I definitely don't blame anybody for selling to them. It's just been a kind of an unintended consequence of that, is that has cut the Nevada cattle numbers. The other thing that's cut Nevada cattle numbers is just the BLM. I mean, they have just cut and cut and cut. I use the analogy, it's like a box, and they just keep drawing little lines inside of that box and just making it smaller and smaller until they finally have just crowded you out. They're coming at us with the wild horses, not me particular, but the wolves, now Navy expansions, the wild horse side. They've come in and bought up a lot of the hay that we need for feeding our livestock. So hay prices got high in 2023. It costs more to get a cow through the winter than the actual financial value of the cow.
Mm.
So people that could hung on, hoping for a good market like we have now, but ones that couldn't, they went out. And so anyway, all those things have led to these drastic shortages of cattle.
Yeah, I remember seeing on the news, and I think it was 23. I think it was Texas in particular, with the drought there, just a line of cattle trailers lining up at the sale barn dispersing because they didn't have the forage to feed them, and they couldn't keep them alive, so they just were getting out. And it was a huge line. It was one particular news story in particular, and that line was a mile or more long. And from the consumer side, if you're listening to this, well, what does that mean to me? Well, that means those are all ranchers no longer raising beef that'll eventually be in the grocery store. They're getting out because they don't have the forage or whatever, and drought's a big cause of that. But like you were saying, I brought this up just a second ago, but what you're looking at here is a graph of the number of what they call AUMs, animal units a month, which is mama cow, baby cow is a 1 unit. And in 1985, there were 10.5 million. Before the Taylor Grazing Act, which this graph doesn't quite go there. I think this one does. 1935, we had somewhere around 18 million AUMs. You can see that over here on the right. And now over time, they've reduced that down to about 8 million AUMs. And you were talking about the sage grouse, and different environmental organizations like Western Watershed would sue the rancher, or sue the BLM, I should say, claimed that the rancher was causing problems for the sage grouse. And then the rancher their only choice was to hire an attorney to counter that, which you can't afford an attorney to go to war with somebody who's got as deep pockets as a foreign funded, potentially environmental organization that can just spend it till you're done. And so it was like a sue and settle. The rancher couldn't fight it. So the BLM would then say, the Bureau of Land Management would say, okay, well, now Jack, instead of running 1,000 pairs, you can run 500 pairs. And so that's how we got to these numbers over time. That green line, by the way, is your forest, your timber harvest. So almost exactly with the reduction of cattle grazing, we've had the forest harvest reduction. That red line, by the way, is the amount of wildfires per acre we've had as your cattle numbers and timber harvest has reduced. So back here, we had just over 7.5 million acres a year in 1985 of wildfires, and then now we're over 10 million acres a year, which a lot of consumers are very aware of the wildfires you have. So yeah, a lot of stacked up. So how can you blame a guy when you can't see, the forest through the trees on how you're ever going to survive? And then somebody comes along with $20 million and you're like, well, we're going to lose it all anyway. So we may as well get out. And I think in some of those cases, they went and bought smaller operations, maybe 100% private ground, but then they're reduced on what they can do on that. So yeah. Let me just share this real quick. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but this goes in line with what we're talking about. This was from the Center of Economic Development in America in 1962. The movement of people from agriculture has not been fast enough to take full advantage of the opportunities that improving farm technologies and increasing capital create. The CED proposed an adaptive approach to utilize positive government action to facilitate and promote movement of labor and capital where they will be most productive. And the goal was to remove 1/3 of farmers off farms in 5 years. So, those old timers were beating their head against a block wall, doing everything they could to try to make it work, not knowing that their own government was directly out against them. And so what that's saying is that farm technology, we're talking ranching, but farming as an example, because it's easier for me to describe. Mm-hmm. You get these big, harvesters now that can do far more acreage, but that ground was all broken up in smaller farms. And so they didn't need this big new piece of equipment that could do 10,000 acres. And so that's the technology they're referring to. So how do we get these guys out of the way so that we can use these big tractors on larger swaths of land? And so the government went to work against our farmers to get them out of the way so that a few guys could become big. And this goes to Earl Butz, which followed shortly after in the 70s. Earl Butz was the USDA Ag Secretary then, and he said, get big or get out. And that was just right in line with what was happening here. And those similar issues were happening to you guys in the West producing cattle. So really what we wanted to dive into today was the consolidation and where that's led us. And that's what's happened is vertical integration and consolidation, mm-hmm. which started in the 80s with Reagan changing the antitrust laws. And we're discovering, folks who we working with, discovering a lot more details behind what went on behind the scenes there. Before I'd met these folks, it was like, oh, well, we just want to make sure Americans can afford cheap food. And so if we change the antitrust laws, that'll be more efficient, right? Maximize efficiency, and food prices will stay low. And I thought, okay, well, he just didn't know the long-term consequences of that. But now some of this new evidence that may come out here in the next year or so, I think there was a lot more conniving efforts behind that than we realized. And so then, every administration up until now has taken advantage of that. And we say now because we've had the fortune of meeting with Secretary Rollins, and she's actually listening to the independents and nobody else has. So talk to us about what has happened. How has this consolidation happen, and what's the consequence? Where are we at today, and what's causing all of this?
Well, I think COVID was a very good, told the tale of what happened. All of your meat going through these 5,000 per head per day, 5,000 head per day processors. And then, you get COVID and you have some workers can't come into work or sick or whatever. Then you're bottlenecked up, and all of a sudden we had empty grocery shelves. We still need those big processors. We need them to keep going. We need them and their change speeds, and we need them to keep rolling. But we also need to be able to get beef processed here locally. There's just no reason for my cattle to be getting on a truck to California, back to Nebraska to get finished, and then back to Reno, Nevada to the consumer. Those consumers from Reno, Nevada, just be able to come out here to Fallon and pick up their beef. That's partly where we need to get, and then partly need to keep the big processors moving along as well. So it's a combination of the two. We got all this talk about export. Export seems to be a big deal, but here we are asking ourselves, how are we even going to feed our own country? So, it's like, why are we going over to help the neighbors when we can't even take care of ourselves? But my biggest frustration is that the export dollars never trickle down to the producers on the ground. I mean, if you just take $1 and you chop it up by who gets that money, when I sell when a fat steer gets processed and gets sold, there's a lot of people down the line that got to get paid back. Your retailers, your processors, your finishers, the guys that had those cattle in the feedlot and finished them, your stocker operators that took that calf at 400 or 500 pounds and make him weigh 8, and then back to your cow calf. and then, from your cow calf guy, you've still got the bank there is waiting for their check and the ranch payment. And boy, pretty soon that $1, there's not much left of it.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. So I downloaded this to share it because I knew this was going to come up. So what this is showing is the breakdown of the food dollar. Now, this isn't specific to the producer, but it's pretty dang close. I should say to the beef producer, but it's pretty dang close what you're seeing here. Let me jump over here and explain what we're looking at and how this breaks down. So this image comes courtesy of the USDA's Economic Research Service. So this is USDA's research. This isn't comes right for the government. This is the industry group breakdown of the food dollar, and it goes into detail. So what we're looking at here is agribusiness, all places producing farm inputs except those described in the industry group, like seed, fertilizer, farm machinery, and other farm services. So they're going to get a piece of that dollar, right? Because you got to pay for that equipment, whatever you're using on your operation. Farm production, that's you guys, all established as classified as farms in agriculture or ranches in agriculture. So that's 7 to 9 cents on the dollar is what the rancher gets for 24 months or so of raising that beef. Now, in some instances, just so the consumers know, some folks are just cow calf and they'll sell that animal, when it reaches a certain weight. What age typically are they selling their calves?
Yeah, kind of that 8 to 12 months.
8 to 12 months. And then it might go to a backgrounder if it's got to put some more weight on it, right? A finishing lot or something like that.
Well, yeah, your stocker operators will usually take them and run them another 6 months. So then kind of at that 18 month is when they'll be shipping yearlings, they're typically going to weigh 7 to 9.
Yep. Yep. And then you've got your food processing. So your slaughterhouses for slaughtering and packaging, that's got a piece of that dollar. Then you've got transportation costs. Then you've got your wholesale traders. So people that are buying and selling the box beef, right? The fact that those folks in the middle, the retail and the wholesale, they have overhead and things like that, but that's where what we're trying to do it from the farm. And it ain't going to work for everybody. Some folks are raising enough livestock that they need to go to into wholesale market. But if we can cut out as many of these middlemen as possible and get that retail dollar to the producer, then they can be viable. And so somebody over here in the comments actually said beef prices need to come down. And that's a big topic the last few days is, do beef prices really need to come down? Before you answer that, let me just play this. Let me play this clip for everybody real quick. if I can find it here. So this is courtesy of Skylar Golden.
America, we have our priorities all effed up. We have a problem paying $6 or $7 a pound for ground beef, but let me show you what we don't have a problem paying for. America, we have our priorities.
So beef prices need to come down. And I remember hearing, and maybe it was from you, but what we're paying for beef now is pretty much equal in the amount of hours that a person has to work to pay for beef. What it was in the 80s is the same as it is now. In other words, if I go work for, I'm going to work and I'm earning whatever I'm earning per hour, that time is going to take me about the same. So, and then your guys' inputs have gone way up. So when they talk about beef prices needing to come down, is that true? Or are we, and this is my opinion, consumers are not prioritizing the nutrient value, because that's really, we've become so disconnected, the nutritional value of beef over a Snickers or potato chips, but we don't think twice when we're grabbing those off the shelf at the convenience store.
Yeah, I mean, the American consumers have just been misled for so long about the nutritional value of beef. It's been demonized as it's going to kill you, and bad for your heart and all that. And now we're finding out that beef is medicine, which all you got to do is look at an old rancher to know that. They're in pretty good shape, and a lot of that's from working hard, but a lot of that's also from eating right. And so, yeah, if you take the nutritional value of beef, the carnivore diet is really coming on big time. Beef is medicine. And once people start to realize that, you can eat your Snickers and all that, and you're going to be going downtown to the doctor and buying more medication, and eating beef and getting on the carnivore diet and getting more exercise. Look at the savings there. So I do not think that beef is overpriced. But the expenses, like you were saying, I think I was looking at something this morning, a baler, like in 1980, something was about $4,500. And now a baler to bale up your hay for your winter forage production is like $65,000. Well, beef hasn't gone up that much. So our input costs are just skyrocketing. My grandpa, he made a good living on about 100 cows. He had no other income, no side income. They were too far from town to have another income or go to town to get a job. And they retired and, sold the ranch to my parents. And my parents did fairly well on 300 to 400 head of cows. And now you're looking, if you're not running a slug of cows or have a job in town, it just doesn't work. I mean, we have been fortunate to be able to start this livestock auction, and that's our job in town,
Yeah.
But just ranching, if you got to go buy one of these ranches, it's not going to work. You either have to marry it or inherit it or come in with some outside money to get a ranch.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, USDA's own data says that 85% of our producers in America, which only make up 2% of the total population, 85% of them make $350,000 a year or less. And you add on top of that the input cost to run that operation. That means 85% of the 2% growing our food are working an off-farm job just to keep farming. And when the number one thing we as human beings or any living organism needs is sustenance, something to fuel our bodies. That's what concerns me as a consumer and an advocate for producers and consumers, is that we're not giving enough value to where our food is coming from. And when we have shrunk our cow herds and our producers numbers so much that we start becoming fully dependent on foreign inputs, that's not a safe place to be. That's why I was saying in the beginning that, our food system is a national security issue.
Yeah. Yeah. And back to my, when I was talking about exports, and then, so we're exporting our premium cuts to other countries. And so very few Americans get to eat that really the best ribeye out there. Then we're importing this lower quality beef coming from countries like Brazil and places like that we don't even know how it's raised. I mean, we hear some things, we hear bad things. We hear about the rainforest being removed. We hear about slave labor. all of this kind of stuff. And then that beef's coming in here, and then it's labeled as product of the USA. It only has to be here 24 hours before they can stamp it product of the USA after it's gone through minimal processing. And so these American consumers that are buying that beef at the store, they do not know that they're being lied to. And I think that's, boy, once people find out about that, I think they're going to be a lot more upset about that than they are about the price of beef, the fact that they've been lied to.
Yeah. Somebody asked over here so if you see me looking over, I'm watching Instagram. Somebody asked over here, what needs to happen so the ranchers can get paid and sell the meat at a price of Americans can afford and eat consistently?
I think it's right to the antitrust laws.
Yeah.
Goes straight there. It goes to breaking up these packers to where there's more competition. Right now, I mean, they're the meat mafia. They control it all. And we have these cattle organizations, you and I have both been pretty outspoken about them that claim to be representing the ranchers, but you can only serve one master. And if you got the same attorney representing the husband and the wife in the divorce, it's not going to go very good for one of them. And, we've gotten the short end of the stick on that. One thing, there's been a lot of talk this week, and everybody's been pretty upset with our president about some comments that he made. And I'm a big Trump supporter. I'm not gonna bash the president, but the question I have for everybody is, man, somebody had his ear for 9 years. They had an iron curtain around him. I mean, we've just now finally gotten access for independent producers to talk to the president or to his cabinet, but before that, we had no access to him. Yeah. And I wish somebody would have taken that time and opportunity to help educate the president. Just what we're talking about here, that the ranchers have nothing to do with the price of beef in the store.
No.
John, that video I sent you, John Campbell, he said the cattle ranchers getting blamed for the price of beef is like the cotton farmer getting blamed for your Fruit of Looms giving you jock itch.
Couldn't say it better.
John's awesome. He says it, the way we can understand it. So
yeah,
I hope somebody can help educate our president on kind of how that works and how that dollar is split up.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that's important is for people to understand how many times those dollars turn over in your local communities. They say 5 to 7 times. So what these steers are selling for here now at $2,000 to $2,500,
mm-hmm.
It's all getting spent right here in these local communities at restaurants, tire shops, feed stores, the hair salon. I mean, everybody in these small communities gets a piece of those beef dollars. And that's what I always tell people. When these small producers hand their money across the counter, it feels exactly the same as the big producers' money, So it's important to keep them both in business.
Well, and that's one of the things that, there's a lot to do. And just going back real quick before I say this, that Iron Dome that the lobbyists for the consolidation put up around DC, not just this president. I mean, we've been dealing with this since the 80s. Well, I mean, hell, we looked at that prior, clear back to when USDA and Department of Interior were established. That's when special interest groups started controlling the message in Washington. And so it's been going on for a long time, which is why we've been so hopeful having Secretary Rollins there, because she's actually taking meetings with independents and wanting to know, what's really going on. How do we really fix this? And I think sometimes because it's been so many years of being beat down, we want these things to change overnight, but that's impossible because there's legal ramifications to everything, which is frustrating. Hell, I've never been more frustrated than the more I become aware of what's going on in DC, knowing that it's such a game that has to be played. But the fact that we finally have somebody who's paying attention and listening and does have the ear of the president, we think we might be able to make a difference, which is probably one of the reasons why he was so upset, is that those people that have had control for so long know they're losing control. And folks, if you're a consumer listening, they're losing control because consumers are finally paying attention. You're asking the questions that have mattered, that the producers have been the only ones asking. Why are our needs not being considered when we're the growers? When it starts on our pastures, why isn't that the thing being given the most attention? and why is it going in other places? I'm going to bring this up real quick. You sent me this. This was on October 25th. So when we talk about bringing the price of beef down, it ain't the rancher, like you said. It's not the rancher that changes the price of beef, and reducing what the rancher's earning at the cow calf level isn't going to affect the price of beef, because those market prices, which you see running a livestock market, that did affect the bottom line of our ranchers who have finally been able to make enough money to keep going. When these announcements were made the last few weeks, their prices for what they were earning at the sale barn went down, but the cost of beef by the box, or boxed beef, they call it, that's what your middlemen are selling. You know, when they buy it from the auction, and they send it through the processor, these big processors, and then they are the ones who are distributing it through all the middlemen, whether it's grocery store or Cisco or whatnot. They hit record prices. So ranchers, your oxen prices were tanking, but boxed beef prices, which is ultimately that in the grocery stores, you know, Walmart and Kroger and, you know, wherever you're at, they're the ones selling it to you at that price. And it's a lot of the middlemen prices that are affecting that. So these guys were making record profits while the ranchers were starting to take a beating. And so it's not the rancher that is causing your beef. And the number of times I hear uninformed consumers blame the rancher on my social media is appalling. It just shows the level of ignorance that's out there. And which is why we do these podcasts, and why I do what I do on social media, to try to help educate. Because you said it a minute ago, they just become uneducated for so long.
Mm-hmm. One thing that we should hit on is, so your cow calf guys over here selling it, you know, at 400 or 500 pounds. Then it's going to your stocker operator that's taking it on to 800 pounds. Then it's going from 800 pounds onto these feedlots where it's being finished to 1,400 pounds. So if you want to sell beef locally, you just became 3 operations, not 1, you know? And a lot of people selling locally, I think they just kind of get into a cash flow model to where we're going to sell this at a certain time. Well, if you're going to take that animal on and sell it locally through your local processor, you better have some money in the bank, or you know, start small and work your way up, because you can't sell that many cattle. The other problem that we see is just the local processors have had so much pressure put on them from USDA. I honestly think it's just straight up weaponized. I think the big dogs weaponized USDA against the small processors and just crushed them out. If you look back at social media during COVID, everything is just like now, buy local. You go through the comments and all this stuff, it all says buy local. Well, you can't buy local if there's nowhere to process it, unless we're going to go out tonight with the old tractor and hang one up, you know?
Yeah. Which then you're not allowed to either, because they've got their hooks in it.
Right. And so, you know, they've crushed these local processors. So the ones that have gone through all the hoops and have stayed in business, you know, they're charging as much to process it as I'm selling for the value of the animal as it's finished.
Yeah.
So rancher gets $2,000 and the processor is maybe $1,400 to $1,500. So anyway, that's something that needs to be touched on. Maybe if we get more local processors, that price will come down. I'm not saying that these local processors are gouging anybody, but their overhead from the government regulations. And I talked to a friend in Montana that has a processor, and they're supposed to have warm water out every 15 minutes for any cattle coming in. Now, do you think that JBS or any of those have to have warm water out for the 5,000 head per day?
Yeah.
So it's like, it's just not fair. You've got these small processors having to jump through hoops. They've got 3 or 4 inspectors standing over them as they're trying to process. And in your big plant, you've got carcasses coming down that chain. The inspectors hiding out, not get run over by a carcass coming down. They talk about chain speeds. They're not joking, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Having run a small processing facility, USDA processing facility for a short time, I can, you know, acknowledge that 100%. I mean, the way I explained it to some folks is it's like putting the same number of NFL referees in the octagon at the UFC, right? That's what you have in a small processor, and they're looking over your shoulder on every little thing you do. Whereas on these big facilities where they're running, like you said, chain speed, which again, because of maximize efficiency, they're calculating how fast that chain is moving, so they know exactly what they're going to get through at the end of the day. But it's the same number of, there might be a few more depending on the size, but still in comparison to that many pounds of beef being run through a 6,000 head a day facility, that's what it's like. And it does make it hard. And the cost for these small processors, they're just like for the rancher, the input costs, they're high too. And so, it makes it really hard. Somebody asked a question here. So why are some ranchers selling to the middlemen? Why doesn't he sell directly to the stores? What are some of the challenges there? And then there's some policies that we can bring up that are part of that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think selling to the stores, the first thing you got to do is convince the store to buy from you, and then you have to have a consistent supply. What if I own a bunch of fat cattle and I go in there and the first one I take in is just tremendous, and he drops his other supplier to go with me, and then I can't fill the need. Now he's got to go back, begging the original guy to come back to him. So yeah, getting into grocery stores would be very difficult. And then it's just back to the processing. If you go to one of these big plants, let's say I got a bunch of fat cattle and I want to sell beef to a grocery store. I got to go to a big plant. There are none in Nevada. So I got to go to Idaho or California to get them processed. Now I got the freight over there. Now, if they're doing several hundred head of cattle a day, kind of the cost is usually around $300 to $400 per head. But if I have them processed here locally, I'm like $1,500 a head. Yeah. But I pay my freight over there on the live animal, and then pay my box beef coming back. It's just very difficult for people to get into that. That's why this whole thing on selling local and all that sounds great, and I'm totally into it. But as you know, and you can explain better than I can, it's very complicated, and quality control. It's not the answer to everything. It's a small piece of the answer. If we can just get 10 or 15 or even 20% of your meat being processed locally and consumed locally, that's outstanding. But we can't go from this model of all Costco to all local.
Yeah, no, we've lost too many processors. I mean, there are places where you got to drive 6 hours one way just to get into a slaughterhouse. And then because of what consolidation has done over the decades, we've lost so many of our small processors that infrastructure isn't there. That's why we're not saying, you said it earlier, we need the big guys just to sustain 320 million people. But as consumers should start considering those that have the means and the desire, start buying local, and let's see if we can rebuild a better system, a better future. But part of that, and this is something I really enjoy talking about, is the consumer behavior and the knowledge. We have, so this small slaughterhouse I ran here in Wyoming, we also had have a restaurant downtown that sells burgers, and we have a meat counter where we can sell fresh beef. Consumers want to go find the nicest, juiciest steak, and that's typically what they go into that meat counter for. But the problem is you're only going to get 24 ribeyes off of one cow. And so for one rancher to supply a restaurant or a grocery store, it's just not possible, because then they're left with hundreds of pounds of the other cuts, the ground beef and the roasts and the short ribs and things like that, that consumers aren't necessarily wanting to pay. Now, I will say, with the cost of beef being where it's at, we've seen a big jump in the percentage of ground beef being bought, which, I mean, in our house, the last cow share we bought 100 pounds. All we wanted was the grind. And I told him, I said, I'm going to buy a quarter, which is about 100 pounds, but replace our prime cuts with ground beef, because that has so many there's so much diversity that you can make with ground beef. And so that's something that consumers need to be aware of, is your behaviors. If you're really wanting to help and get involved, be willing to buy a share, or consider buying a share, a quarter, half, or whole, and then cook through the whole thing. And you're going to, make that way, way easier for our producers. I mean, before convenience came along, that's how our grandparents did it. Our parents and maybe grandparents, they bought the share. They didn't say, hey, I only want your prime cuts. That wasn't even part of the conversation. It was, I need a side of beef. Okay, great. I got it for you. And then mom or grandma cooked through the whole thing and made that through the whole meals. That made it way easier for that system to work. So unless consumers understand their role in this, it's just not possible. And then again, like we were talking about, getting our processing centers back to where they used to be, which is more of them, But then you get into, I mean, it's just a wicked web we've weaved, because then you have to have employees willing to do that job, willing to go to a slaughterhouse and work on the kill floor or work on the cut floor and do those things that aren't glamorous jobs, but are absolutely necessary. And not many people want to do that anymore.
That would be a great something with your local colleges and schools and 4-H and FFA. And, you know, we can go give speeches and all that, but man, if my kid was in 4-H or FFA, I would want them to go to the local processor and learn about meat. You know, I know a lot about beef when it's walking, and I'm pretty good at eating it, but there's a lot of stuff in the middle there that I don't know enough about, that I need further education on. And that'd be a great, even like a grant or just something to help teach these and hopefully get more people into that business. Yeah.
This is more on the farming side, but to that question about why they don't go direct. In 2010, because it's a policy for farming, but there's also policies in the beef side that are the same way. For example, you can't buy an animal after it's been processed unless it's gone through a state or federally inspected facility. So if you're a custom processor, they have to sell that animal alive, which means they have to go and find a customer willing to pay them now to receive it later. And customer behavior is convenience and instant gratification. So your niche of finding somebody willing to pay for an animal that's still, 1 to 3 months away from being processed, and then 2 weeks hanging in the processing center. So you've now niched down to a much smaller pool of consumers willing to do that. But in order to go to a custom processor, that person's name has to be on that cow's ear tag while it's standing on the hoof. Those are regulation issues. So that's why Thomas Massey's Prime Act, or, Joe Salatin, if anybody knows him, talks about the Food Emancipation Proclamation. In other words, as consenting adults, we should have the right to choose who and what we buy, where we buy our food, without the government being in the middle. I mean, that would help out a lot. But on the farm side, Obama passed this thing called the Food Modernization Act, which heightened the microbial tests of water and the other and the soil and stuff that was on this food. Prior to that, a farmer could harvest their field and take it right to the grocery store. And then that policy came in, and people might say, oh, well, they could still do it. They just have to follow those rules. Okay, well, those rules required about $180,000 or more in equipment implications to do those microbial tests to go in there. So now only the bigger companies, the bigger corporations, could participate in selling directly to or now becoming the middleman from a farmer going to the grocery store. So policies have become major issues in preventing that local sale. So I'm going to bring this up. It's a topic you and I've talked quite a bit about, and I think it's important. We've talked about the NCBA in past podcasts and how they've led to where we're at. So here's a question. All of a sudden, I'm seeing a bunch of stuff from Common Ground Coalition. This is a fairly new organization, or is a brand new organization. Email blasts and paid Facebook ads, etc. Who are they, and where's their money coming from? So, Jack, I know you've done a lot of investigating in this and research, and because of the connections you have throughout the country, you're pretty well versed. But what is the Common Ground Summit, and what is their overall approach? What are they trying to accomplish, and who's part of those organizations? Because From the Farm, let me just say this: at From the Farm, we exist entirely to support the independent farmers and ranchers that we have left. And hopefully, if we succeed in what our mission is, we see this number of, 2% of our nation being producers getting back up to where it should be. And I don't know the exact number of what that is, but 2% is certainly not enough. And so when we learn about organizations and folks out there that are causing consolidation and hurting our nation's food supply chain or food security from the perspective of independence, right? Just because you have food, if all the food you have comes from a corporation, is that something we as consumers want? That's the thought exercise. If we as consumers say, well, on one hand, as long as we have it, great. But if we put all our eggs in that one basket, is that what we want? So who is the Common Ground and what's their overall mission as you know it?
Let me back up for 1 second. I'll get to that.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to say, I see a lot of stuff on Facebook about how you got to go down the end of a long, dirt, dusty road somewhere to get your raw milk and your beef.
Yeah.
You can buy your weed in town.
Yeah.
That really sums it up. I mean, everywhere you drive them down the street, there's a store, stop in and get your weed, but you can't buy beef. And that's like what you're talking about with Joel Salatin with consenting adults should be able to buy beef. Well, if we can buy drugs here at the local store, we ought to be able to buy our beef there. Common Ground Coalition. I've been one of the most outspoken ones against them. I know I've taken a lot of flack for it, but I've also gained a ton of support for it. The problem I had with Common Ground Summit right off the get-go is I just went down the list and read who they are. And the people that they invited to their Common Ground Summit in Denver, Colorado, was, in my opinion, Jack Payne's opinion, all the same guys who have had access to the president and who have allowed us to get where we are. And I call it your report card. I mean, at some point, your parents are going to get your report card and they're going to see whether you got F's or A's. You can't hide it forever. And, it's everybody knows that we're losing producers. Our cattle numbers are way down. We can make excuses for why that happened. One of the most common excuses is drought. Everything, let's blame it all on drought because nobody wants to admit that our policies caused everybody to go broke and go out of business. And so I think, it's NCBA, it's NCBA stands for National Cattlemen's Beef Association. National Cattlemen's Association back in the 80s was, your national, like your state affiliates, but they were national. So they were all your state affiliates lumped into one. And I guess they were, I don't know the total history, but I know they were in some financial trouble and were struggling. So they allowed the beef packers to become members. So it went from the NCA to the NCBA. And as we've talked about a lot, you can't serve two masters. And obviously the packers have a whole lot more money than the broke rancher. So it's pretty easy to see who NCBA is going to work for.
Who they're
so I always say, when you go to Washington, D.C., you should have to go dressed as who you're representing. And those NCBA guys, it's like Halloween every day because they go there with their cowboy hats on, but they should go with their aprons and their knives slinging on their belts because they're there representing the butchers. They're there representing the packers. And of course, they were a big part of Common Ground Summit. And then LMA, which is the one that confuses me the most because LMA stands for Livestock Marketing Association. And we're no longer with them. We switched to a different company because we were so disgusted with them. But they are the insurance company that sells insurance to pretty much every sale barn in America. Their top paid, they don't call him a CEO, they call him a secretary, I think. Their top paid person last year got $1.8 million in annual salary.
Wow.
And that money comes directly out of the producer's pocket through the sale barn. We're the pass through to LMA. And so they've been taking some heat. Both of those groups have been taking quite a bit of heat. And the way I look at it, the way I tell everybody is that they're losing members faster than the Democratic Party. And so they started this deal called Common Ground Coalition. And I just call it kind of a rebrand or a false front or a shell company for who they originally were. And they're trying to get all the support so that they can go to DC and represent us. They don't tell us what they're going to say when they get to DC. They just say, sign up. We got you. We'll take care of you. And, one thing about Jack Payne, whether you love him or hate him, he's an open book. You know exactly where I stand on everything. And those guys, they won't tell you what their meetings are about. They won't tell you what they're talking about. Now, they did come up with 5 points. Well, they came up with 6 points at their deal in Denver, but then they only came to, so it went to print with 6. Sustainability was one of them. That's a hot subject word that has been hijacked by the the environmental global warming crowd.
Yeah.
And so I don't, sustainability is a great word until it got hijacked. So anyway, that was number 6. But the points they came up with were number 1 was the inheritance tax. They wanted to get the inheritance tax limit raised, which is good for me because I own a fairly large ranch, and when I pass away, I don't want my kids to pay inheritance tax. So thank you guys for that. But the president was already working on that.
Yeah, which we know he did remove the inheritance tax already.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I'm not sure what the big deal was on that one because we had an election and we worked our butts off to get one particular guy. elected because they knew he would help us. And that's one of the things that he agreed to do. One of the things that they were on was the H2A workers, which, a lot of ranches do need help, and H2A is a big deal. But these small producers I talk about, they are the H2A worker, and they're also the school teacher and the housewife, and they're everything, So I don't know if H2A workers is really going to help that 85% of these producers that have 100 head of cattle or less, because they can't afford a worker. They are. Another one, a big one, was LRP changes, which stands for Livestock Risk Protection. I won't get into that too far, but what I was disappointed in that one was I felt that it incentivized your buyers, your big buyers, to support the video markets where only 10% of the cattle in the country are sold. And it took away the incentive for them to support their local sale barns where 85% of the cattle are sold.
So more consolidation.
Yeah. And Shad Sullivan says Common Ground Coalition is the lobbying arm of vertical integration. And, they can argue that that's not true, but if you just look at the report card, there it is, So there's some really good guys in that group. I know them personally, and I call them friends. We just have a totally different perspective on what's best for the industry. And one of the things that's really confused me in this last week, where they went to DC and then didn't meet with the president, or how that all went down. You and I are one of the things that they always brag on is the seat at the table and coming together and talking about stuff. And then for them to get to DC and then not sit down with the president left a lot of us really confused. That looks like the one table I would want to sit at. Even if I didn't agree with the president, I would want to sit down with him to help educate him if I had the opportunity.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I think that might be the hardest part about calling some of these organizations out, is there's a lot of good men and women that are involved in those organizations. And at the end of the day, what it comes down to is not so much the people, but the intentions of what that organization is working towards. One thing I've heard a lot about is beef on dairy, as this new movement forward. And I'll admit, I don't know a ton about that. I know a little bit, and it's kind of self-explanatory, but it seems to me like, because of consolidation over the last few decades, reducing the amount of livestock that are grown by cow-calf producers throughout the country, whether it's public land grazing that's been reduced, or CRP land in the conservation protection land in the East Coast. We've reduced the ground and the affordability to be producing, and that's a direct effect of consolidation and vertical integration. And so now that those things have been exacerbated, they've been exhausted. There's no more. The supply is dwindling. It's like shifting their focus to where they can go and sort of pillage the next thing, right? And this is a completely ignorant question on my end, and maybe you have the answer. Maybe I'll have somebody else on to talk about it. But inherently, I look at that and I think, okay, so if there's an incentive to breed beef cattle on dairy cattle, and we know that through manipulation of genetics or whatnot, we can select for what we want the most of. Let's say it's steer calves, bull calves, that we can then turn into steer calves to put on feed and then put into the beef supply chain. Is there a risk long-term of reducing now even our dairy herd because they've selectively bred for bull calves for steers? Am I just is that a conspiracy theory, owed to my tinfoil cowboy hat there, or is there potential risk to that?
Oh, there's definitely potential risk. I mean, if, as high as these beef cattle are, if everybody's going there to try to produce a steer, and then all of a sudden they wake up tomorrow and they're short of heifers, they can't just pop one of those heifers out and be milking her tomorrow. It's a 2-year process. And so, I don't know a lot about the milk side of this. I think that the milk is a lot lower than it should be. I think their cost of production is high as well. Obviously, as high as ours, or much higher, because they have much more input. I think if we were to go look at that milk price, so I think the dairymen have gone to that breeding into Angus because those Holstein calves just a couple of years ago, they couldn't give them away, and now I believe those half dairy calves are like $1,100 to $1,400 a head, like the day they're born. which is just crazy. So that's a really good source of income for them. So we sure don't blame them for going there.
Yeah.
But I'm sure they're thinking to themselves, okay, at what point here do I have to go back to cranking out some heifers? The dairies, they're use a lot of semen, a lot of AI, sex semen, so they can go whatever direction pretty quick. A guy like me running on 1 million acres, I'm going to put a bull with the cow and it's going to have a calf, hopefully. And there's a 50-50 chance it's going to be a heifer or a bull. And so it just takes a lot longer to get those numbers back up. One thing I wanted to go back to common ground is that one of the big the burr under my blanket with them also was that they let the Angus Association guys were a big part of that. Mm-hmm. And the Angus Association, if you've been watching, have recently taken $5 million from Bezos.
Yeah.
To study the methane, to create this carbon climate friendly beef. And man, we already know that our cattle are the most climate friendly. I mean, God didn't screw up when he made cows. They're perfect. And so we were extremely disappointed to see them kind of legitimize or validate that cows are the problem. So if I'm going to go out and create a coalition to try to bring people together and ranchers, whoever was in charge of picking the attendees and invited the Angus Association and the members of the Angus Association who were responsible for taking that money from Bezos, I don't think I want that guy going to DC to represent me if he wasn't even bright enough to see the public perception of who he invited.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, that's exactly right. Cattle are not the problem for the environment, and the Biden administration just pushed that like no other. In fact, I get crazy comments all the time about, this last election. And I am so glad Trump won. Is the man perfect? No, nobody is. But the reality is you guys even have a short video that you did for the election on this, where Kamala said she was going to support the reduction of cattle because of the impact they were having on the climate and the environment. And that's just that's a bald-faced lie perpetuated by these environmental groups, because the reality is the more livestock we have, I'm going to just throw this up here again. The reduction of livestock has led to desertification and wildfires. This is the result. When you remove those ruminating animals off of the landscape, especially in a dry environment like the Desert West, you've removed the rumen, which is actually what, if a leaf or a branch or something, or a tree falls off, a branch falls off a tree, or a tree falls on the ground, that sucker's going to lay there forever before it decomposes in the West. Mm-hmm. Versus the back east, where there's moisture, where all those microbes get in there, those insects get in there, and that sucker gets broken down. In the West, the only thing that breaks down that forage and turns it into soil biology is the ruminating gut of a ruminant animal, which used to be bison. I've argued that cattle are actually a modern keystone species, and I only say modern because the bison are gone. And so now cattle are what will heal the environment. And we've got friends. We went back there with R.C. Carter, who's doing some of this high intensity, short duration, rotational grazing. And his rangeland is responding incredibly well. I mean, we went out there and did this I went out there with him and did this little article with somebody, and he pulled back the forage that had been growing, and there were all kinds of insects, and you could see piles of, it didn't matter where you pulled that forage back, you could see piles of earthworm manure, or earthworm, worm castings, they call it. That's soil biology. And so because we've reduced the number of cattle on our grazing land, we're now suffering the consequences of these massive wildfires. So it's just a bald-faced lie that cows are a problem for the environment. And so then to feed into it, like you're talking about with the Angus Association and buying into this methane issue or CO2 issue from cattle, it's a stab in the back for a lot of those guys.
It is. And they know that cows aren't bad for the environment, but what they'll say is, I know it's BS, but the money's too good. And that just Oh, yeah, so bad. It's like, okay, you just threw the cow under the bus so you could get a check. And a lot of these guys at Common Ground, I mean, the moderator of Common Ground is building this big feedlot up in Montana, and he said we've been doing it wrong for 50 years raising beef. He's talking about, but we're going to do it better in the next 50. And putting these cattle in on cement slabs and methane digesters, and they just get into the subsidy side of this deal. It just makes me sick that they're cranking out this methane going back into the grid is at 10%, 10 times higher rate in the name of cows are bad for the environment than regular methane. And it's just like solar and that. If solar is the answer, it shouldn't have to take government subsidies. And if these methane digesters are so wonderful, the government, us taxpayers, should not have to subsidize it. It should be self-sufficient and cranking out power, energy for our country without the taxpayers subsidizing it. So yeah, I can't go along with that stuff, and I can't support groups that are bringing those kind of people in. They talk about a seat at the table, and I think we ought to be flipping that table over and ripping a leg off of it and cracking somebody upside the head if they're going to be the ones throwing the cows into the bus. Because, like I said before, God didn't screw up when He made cows.
Nope. He didn't screw up when He makes anybody.
Yeah.
So that all comes from the 6 inches between our ears, unfortunately. So
yeah, for sure. So,
well, I appreciate you being on there with me, Jack. We went over an hour. I'm glad you had the time for that. In closing, I appreciate those that were joining us live here and asking questions. The replay, if you're going to share it, is going to be on our YouTube channel, From the Farm USA. Click under the live button there or scroll down on that homepage and you'll find it. In closing, what I'd like to just offer is that the consumers, which makes up makes up 98% of the folks in this country that aren't producers. This is the time in our lives in history where we have decisions to make, a choice to make, and getting to know your farmer and rancher for those that are selling direct is important. Or when you go to a restaurant or a grocery store, taking a second to ask if they've got anything that comes as close to your home as possible. Start supporting those folks that are doing what they can to get out of the system, the vertically integrated system that exists. There's a lot of them out there trying to do that. And so at From the Farm, that's why we created FromTheFarm.org, so that those who are starting to sell direct or wanting to sell direct, we're trying to simplify all the challenges that are in the middle of, Jack's got that ranch he's on and then his livestock auction. Adding to that marketing and sales and logistics and all the things that go with going direct is really complicated. So our mission is to simplify that for Jack so that you gotta, we're trying to make it as close to what consumers are used to as possible without adding the middlemen. That's why on our platform, the producer gets 100% of the retail dollar. We have found other ways to make revenue, but ultimately we don't succeed until our producers succeed, because we felt that was the model that needed to exist. They need to win before the company wins. And so that's what we built there. And so if you want to, Jack, how can people get a hold of you if they have questions or want to get to know more about what you do? And I know you've kind of teased, and maybe you still have the time for it yet, but you've teased about starting a direct beef company, and maybe we can help you do that From the Farm. But if they've got question about what's going on or these kinds of things, how can they get a hold of you? How would you like them to find you?
Yeah, probably just through Facebook, through Messenger is the best way to get a hold of me. And, like I said, it's pretty easy to see what I think about stuff because I'm pretty open about it. Maybe one thing we should talk about, not today, but we should have another discussion about the truth in labeling and hopefully helping the consumer understand that this beef that's coming in, how it's mislabeled. And I think, a lot of these politicians, this 1 or 2% of the cattle side pushing for truth in labeling, we don't have a big enough voice. But if the consumers start asking for truth in labeling, then these politicians and these retailers are going to have to start listening.
Yeah, you're right. Well, let's just spend a quick minute on that, because that's an important topic happening right now, which is there's a number of Congress people working on it's called mandatory country of origin labeling, MCOOL, which we did have at one point up until 2015. 2015, it was repealed because guess what? When consumers went to the grocery store and it was very, very clearly labeled where the origin of that beef came from, consumers chose USA. And then issues with the WTO, the World Trade Organization, and really lobbyists found their way to get their hooks in that, and they got that removed. So most consumers, it surprises me, and it doesn't surprise me when I have this conversation with consumers. They have no idea that when they're buying this beef at the grocery store and it has that USDA bug on it, that it's actually not USA, that it's likely it came from, or if it's ground beef, it's been mixed with imported beef. Mm-hmm. And now look, if that can help bring down the cost for those that can't afford that choice, great. But if you, the consumer, don't know how to make that distinction, then you don't know. And if you really are out to supporting your American producers, you can't even do that because you don't know how to do that.
The only way to buy from your local, from American producers, is to buy local. And that is just wrong. The American consumer should be able to walk into the grocery store and decide, do I want to support America first and American ranchers? What those guys are doing is they're using the reputation and mainly just the reputation of the American cowboy and the American rancher to sell a foreign product. I mean, you think you're buying an American-made hat, and turns out you look inside and it's made in China. But they took that label off of that hat and put "Made in the USA" on there. It's just a bald-faced lie. And that Neville Spear, I don't know if he's with Beef Magazine or Drovers or whatever, did a big thing about the consumers don't care whether it's American or imported. They do care. They just don't know they're being lied to. It says product of the USA on it. And as Americans, we would never dream that our own government would lie to us about where our food is from. And so, of course, they don't care because they don't know they're being lied to. And mandatory. And I'm not saying that mandatory country of origin labeling is ideal, but it's the best we have right now. And so, if somebody wants to come up with a better something else to run through, then we're going to go with MCool, and then we can try to improve it down the road as we go, or whatever. But right now, I mean, we're all just sick and tired of working our butts off, doing it right, raising good cattle, and then going down to the grocery store and having that stuff from Brazil. That meat coming in is only 3 to 7% of it is inspected. But just like we talked about earlier in the interview, you've got 4 inspectors standing over your shoulder here in Fallon, Nevada, as you're trying to process. But the meat coming in from some country that just blows my mind is only 3 to 7% of it is inspected.
And the same folks you and I both know, they said that 17% of that has been found to be contaminated, which equates to about 100,000 or 100 million pounds that is potentially contaminated that was never inspected. I mean, just look at all the recalls we've seen over the last couple of months from these big processed food brands. Right.
So we don't want to be on here like trying to put fear into people to not buy beef. That's not our intent. No. Our intent is for you to call the 202 number in DC and tell these politicians who are getting campaign donations from JBS and Tyson and Cargill and Malvern and all these, that you're paying attention and you're going to be watching how they vote on MCool. And if they vote against it, they're going to get primaried. I mean, that's our only, and that's what, when we talked to Ms. Rollins, that's what she said. We're going to start educating the consumers about truth in labeling. She didn't say truth in labeling. She just said about labeling. Yeah. So I think if the consumers start pushing on these politicians, and the ranchers keep pushing on the politicians, and the ranchers keep working with the Trump administration saying, the answer to this is to break up these big monopolies. Yep. That's how we get the price of beef down, not by the rancher getting less money at the auction. It's to break up these and all this money that went out there during COVID that was supposed to get more local processing and all that. I was really hoping that Doge, whatever they called it, would find somewhere where some of that money went, because it sure didn't get to our local processors. Right. It's just like USAID. I mean, maybe 5% of it did, but somebody skimmed off the other 95%. We don't know where it went. Yeah. So there's got to be accountability. That's what's so cool about the administration we have now, is that they're listening to us, and we have a direct line to them and a back and forth. And what I've been most satisfied and happy about is the questions they ask. Not only are they listening to us, but when somebody asks you back questions, you know they're getting it. And
Yeah.
When we're talking to Rollins, I mean, she's asking the right questions. And the other day when I got to speak with Kennedy and Burgum and Kelly Loeffler, the back and forth was really good. So I would encourage people to try to find a way to get their ear and help educate them on this stuff.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, and I would say with that, in closing, I would say this administration, you know, there's some hate going on here on Instagram, but this is what I'll say, having been in this for a while, and you as well, this is the first time we're being heard. So rather than being an asshole about it, pray for their discernment.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a lot going on there. There's so many inputs coming in from all over with all these special interests, and even just trying to navigate who's on your side and who isn't on your side, and what trade organizations really out for themselves versus out for the American people. It's not easy. So pray for their discernment and ask that God guides them and helps us make the decisions that need to be made, because we have forsaken our food supply chain for so long that the consumers are the ones that are in trouble. And if you don't know your farmer and rancher, I highly recommend that become a priority for you in your life, so that you can shake the hand that feeds you and make sure that you've got somewhere to go. And because COVID showed us, doesn't mean it's guaranteed.
Yeah.
So
I think a lot of this whole thing in the last 2 weeks with Trump and what he said about beef, it's the 10% or 20% that don't like Trump that are all the ones on social media just piling on him. The people who support him aren't being as outspoken. It's the ones, it's just like when we were cussing Biden or Kamala, we were the outspoken ones, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what's happening right here, is you're seeing all this stuff on social media, all bashing on Trump and what he did to the market and all that. But when this thing starts coming back next week, none of them will be on there saying, look, the market's better.
Yeah.
You know, they're just throwing rocks while they can, but we need to ignore them and look at the big picture and get rural America back on track.
Yep. That's right. For those that are asking the number to call, I don't have that on hand. I apologize. But if you do a Google search, basically just look up your state and how to get a hold of your Congress people, and then that number, and that's how you'll be able to find the right people to call. So, awesome. Thank you, Jack. Appreciate your time. This is a great conversation. I know we'll do another one again when we've got more to talk about, because there's plenty we could be talking about.
Yes, sir.
So,
Okay,
all
thanks.
right. Yeah. Thank you, brother. Appreciate it.
You bet.
In 1930, there were 6 million farms in America. Today, that number has plummeted to 1.8 million. And now 85% of the beef in America is controlled by just 4 companies. That means fewer farmers have to produce more food, thus incentivizing them to produce a high quantity of food instead of high quality food. Plus, if something goes wrong, the 98% of us that don't grow food are at risk of starving. Yikes, that's dark. Let's go darker. A few very wealthy companies have control over all the food. And if North Korea has taught us anything, a centralized food supply can accidentally or intentionally kill a lot of people. The bottom line is this: you can't wait until hits the fan to figure out what your family's going to eat, but all hope is not lost. Here's the plan. It's called From the Farm, an industry-disrupting platform that directly connects customers and local farmers with a website that's as easy to use as Airbnb. From the Farm gives you fresher, higher quality foods, strengthens communities, and helps small farmers not only survive, but thrive. We can't do this alone. We need the strength of the American people behind us. Help us build a new food system that combines the wisdom of the past with the technology of the future. Investing in From the Farm isn't just a financial decision. It's an investment into our future, our small family farms, and our food sovereignty. Invest today.